Welcome to the very first episode of the Artist Soul podcast. My name's Rod Moore, and in this first ever episode, we're going to talk about why I've started this podcast, a little bit about my background so you can get to know me, and what my goals and aspirations are for this podcast moving forward into the future. Welcome to the Artist Soul podcast. Each week we explore what it means to be an artist, finding your artistic voice, developing your artistic skills, and how to build a professional career and business around your art. Now, please welcome your host, artist and art teacher, Rod Moore. All right, welcome. This is the very first episode of the Artist Soul podcast. It's something I've been wanting to do for some time now, is put together a podcast where I can share my thoughts on what it means to be an artist, finding your own artistic journey, and developing yourself as an artist. Now, how do you create a voice as an artist? And probably more importantly, though, what I really want to focus in on during this podcast and the future episodes of the podcast is how do you, if you're an artist, you love art, you have a passion for it, you're probably struggling with something that a lot of artists do, and that is how do I move from where I am and move into a professional career as an artist? How do I build a business around my art? And that's something I want to spend a lot of time focused on, both the business side, but also the mindset and the attitude side of things, and which applies to learning to paint and finding an artistic voice as well. But I really want to hone in on that because I think it's something that so many artists struggle with. And it's a shame, they don't need to if only they would learn a few basic skills and adopt the right sort of mindset and attitude towards what they do. I believe it's the greatest time in history right now for artists. There's never, ever been a better time than there is right now. You go back 20 years ago, you couldn't listen to podcasts while you're in your studio or driving in your car, so you couldn't get the knowledge and skills that you needed, or it wasn't as readily available as what it is today. And we're just blessed to be artists in this particular point in time. Now, the art market is fragmented, as we know. It's not a gallery-controlled model anymore, even though there's still a lot of galleries that do control certain artists' careers and so on. But the opportunities are greater than ever, to sell your art online, to connect with your collectors and buyers of your art directly through social media. There's never been a better time than right now to be an artist, and I firmly believe that. My journey, I'll share some about my journey with you in this podcast today, just so you get a bit of background and a bit of understanding of where I come from. But if it went back 20 years ago, it would not have been possible for me to have been a full-time artist, I don't believe, right? I think the last decade, there's been so much shift in the way we make art available to the market and different ways of generating an income from our art, that it's enabled people like me to become full-time professional artists. This is all I do is my artwork, and I make money, make an income from a range of different sources, and I'll talk to you more about those. And I think if you're an artist wanting to become a full-time artist, you need to be thinking about multiple streams of income. So I've been able to develop those and build a six-figure plus business in the space of really the last 7 or 8 years. But if it was 20 years ago, it just would not have been possible because the technology hadn't developed to the point where it has today. And I'm excited about that. And this is the reason why I've started this podcast, is because I want to bring this way of thinking, this knowledge, to a big audience of artists. The idea of a starving artist today just seems ridiculous to me, because if you're a starving artist, it means you're not doing the right things in the right way and thinking the right way, because there's more opportunity than ever before. And if you're consistent and persistent and you're doing right things in the right way, you can create an income out of your art, So we're going to talk about that. So first of all, though, let me back up, rewind. Who is this guy talking to you? What's his funny accent, and what's he all about? And why should I listen to him, right? And I think that's an important starting point for this podcast. And so let me tell you a little bit about me, right? So I haven't always been an artist. I have always been a creative person. I was a musician. I've written novels, and I've tried different things. I've been an entrepreneur, and I've always had this creative uh, aspect to my being. It's who I am. I'm a creator, and it wasn't always that I was a painter. In fact, just to backtrack, I wasn't a painter at all or an artist. And then in 2006, I was working in a little office in Elsternwick, Victoria. So it's in Australia, for those of you listening overseas. I was working out of a little office, and I broke my coffee mug, and anyone who knows me knows I used to love my coffee, right? I broke my coffee mug. I went to the $2 shop next door and to buy a mug, a replacement mug. It was a Monday morning, and I picked up a coffee mug off the shelf. I turned around and I found myself in the art supplies section, right on the other side of the aisle. And I was just amazed at all these beautiful colors and brushes and canvases, right? And all the different things that go with it. And this little voice inside my head said, I'd love to have a go at painting. I'd love to be a painter. And I think it was more about expressing my creative soul, really, was why I got that urge, that intuitive nudge, and I listened to it, right? And something in my head said, just buy everything and go home and have a go, right? So I did. I bought 52 colors and brushes and canvases. I went home and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but I produced my first little painting that weekend, and then I did what most people who decide to have a go at painting do. I quickly assumed that I had zero talent for art, right? Which I later came to understand was the wrong way of thinking. I packed everything into a box and put it under the bed, didn't look at it again for 2 years. And then in 2008, I was in London and I was there on business. I had back-to-back meetings, and I came out of a meeting, my mobile phone beeped, and the person I had my next meeting with had cancelled. That left me about a 2-hour gap. And I look up and I'm standing in front of the Tate Gallery, the Tate Britain Gallery in London, on the banks of the Thames River there, not far from Westminster. And I thought, you know what, I've never been into an art gallery. So this is 2008, and I'm about 40 years of age, I guess, at that stage. I thought, well, I'll just go in, kill a bit of time and have a look. And that way, my dad liked art, I knew that. So I thought I could have something to chat to him about, and share the experience. So in I go, Tate Gallery Britain, or the Tate Britain Gallery, and I find myself standing in front of these J.W. Turner oil paintings, maritime, naval sort of scenes, and they were huge. And I just stood there mesmerized for about 2 hours, just looking at these paintings. And I thought, my God, I didn't know that this is possible, and call me naive, and perhaps I was, but I hadn't really explored the visual arts side of things before. I'd been a musician and, obviously spent a fair bit of time exploring music, going to gigs and so on, but never looking in an art gallery. And so in I go, there I am standing in front of these J.W. Turner, and I later went and looked at his watercolor paintings, and they just blew my mind, And so again, this intuitive voice said to me, you're going to become a painter. I just had this overwhelming sense that you're going to spend the rest of your life as an artist being a painter, right? But of course, we talk ourselves out of these things. I don't know if you've ever had an intuitive nudge like that, but I talked myself out of it. And I thought, don't be silly, that could never happen. I've never even picked up a brush. Well, I had 2 years ago, and it was a disaster, right? But that thought became a nagging thought, and it wouldn't go. It persisted. So not long after that, I'm back home. We lived in Geelong, my wife and I at that stage, and we were renovating an old house there. And my parents came to visit. To say hi and so on. And so I was chatting with them, and out of my mouth came the words, I've decided I'm going to become a full-time artist, right? And I didn't even think about it consciously. The words just popped out of my mouth, and I sort of announced this to my parents and my wife, and they all looked back at me. And Rod's always been the kind of person who's on the idea of the week plan, so they kind of said, "Oh, that's nice, dear," and went about their business, probably not believing it. And again, I didn't really believe it at the time, but the words that popped out of my mouth. It was almost like some other being had taken over my soul and said, "This is what you're going to do for the rest of your life," right? So it was around about 2008, and I was fiddling around with watercolor at the time and getting absolutely nowhere. And then in November 2010, my father had become ill, and it was evident that he only had a short period of time left on this earth, and it was coming up to Christmas, and we were all going to go up to. They were living in New South Wales. We were all going to go to his or mum and dad's for Christmas, and it was probably going to be the last Christmas that we were going to have together. And so I decided I wanted to do him a painting. And so in November 2010, I did my very first oil painting, and I ended up doing the second one I did was a larger painting, maybe 16 by 20 inches. And it was a picture of him walking along the beach because he loved the beach. And that was the second oil painting that I did. So that started something. Once I felt the feel of oil paint in the brush, and putting it on the canvas, that was the start of something, for me. And so I struggled with this idea of I want to become a full-time artist. I feel really drawn towards it. I don't know if you've ever felt that, but I felt really compelled to pursue this idea of becoming a full-time artist. But then what gets in the way? Society, people's attitudes and beliefs, and your own unconscious conditioning. Like you start to think, okay, I want to be a full-time artist, but artists starve. Artists don't make any money. They're poor. They don't make sales. And do I really want to live that way? But so that was one side of the equation. And I had people all around me saying that type of thing. Which I've come to understand is really a stereotypical belief system that may have held some truth at some point in the past. But, it doesn't have to be true here today as we head into 2020, the year 2020, with the incredible opportunity we have in front of us right now. It doesn't have to be that, starving artist myth. And, but, I had all this background noise from society, from general attitudes towards the arts and artists, and my own family and friends, and they were all well-meaning, of course, but they probably didn't think the way I thought. So I had a lot of fear and anxiety around becoming a full-time artist. But the truth was I hadn't really found anything else in my life that I felt so passionate about. I'd had, for a long time, I'd gone from job to job to job, and I never could settle into any of them. And I had found myself in starting a little business a few years earlier than this, where I became a marketing consultant, and I enjoyed marketing, helping businesses with their marketing because it was creative, right? It was a creative pursuit. So I had a bit of an advantage, I guess, in that I had a little bit of background knowledge around marketing, but absolutely zero knowledge about how to market and sell art. I had no idea. As I said, I'd never been in a gallery before, the Tate Britain Gallery. And I started on this journey of learning how to paint, firstly, and then learning how to build an art career and an art business around my art. And it's been a long and interesting journey, so we're coming up now it's almost November 2019. So it's coming up to my 9th year of having started doing my first painting. And, where I'm at today is I've built a business around my art. It has multiple streams of income. It's primarily focused on teaching art, but not in workshop type environments. That's, only a small part of what I do. But I generate, a substantial six-figure income through my art business. And that involves selling art as well. I'm selling more and more art all the time. And, but the key thing is multiple streams of income, multiple ways of being able to take your artwork and your artistic skills and turning them into different income streams. And if you can work that out, then, becoming a full-time artist becomes a whole lot easier. And what I recognize straight away is that fundamentally the business model for artists is all wrong, right? Most artists spend all their time in the studio producing art, and then they have one or two galleries or an art dealer, and they rely on those galleries or art dealer for their income, for their livelihood. and the galleries tend to control, what gets sold and what doesn't and to who. And the artist has no relationship or connection with the collectors other than maybe shaking a few hands at opening night of an exhibition. And to me, that model seems a bit flawed. Having one sole source of income, relying on third parties rather than yourself. So when I looked at it, I guess I was looking at the art world through my filter, which is my business background, my marketing background, and understanding business models. And I looked at it and I thought there's something just inherently not right about the way art is being done by professional artists. One of the things that really concerned me about entering the art space was that the model predominantly is you spend all day in a studio, you produce artwork, and then you go and sell that artwork, and then you're back to zero, right? So you're never actually building a asset and an income stream around that asset the way traditionally the art world has worked, unless you become really famous, which, let's face it, the vast majority of us probably aren't going to become. So I started to explore different ways of generating an income, looking at different business models. How could I create an asset around my art? So when I share this sort of thinking with other artists, one of the very first things they say was, I'll just create prints of my art. And that's a good idea because then you're turning one image into potentially, 100 sales if you have a limited edition print. The downside of that is, of course, is that, if you're not a very well-known artist and you have your prices at a certain price point, it's difficult to sell prints. So it's not exactly the answer that you need as an artist. And so I started to explore, how do you create an income out of art? I looked around, I saw a lot of professional artists that I admired here in Australia, and pretty much every single one of them taught art. So that was a clue. I figured that part of the income stream needs to be the teaching of art. Because that can give you a more consistent and reliable income, and that income can then fund your studio practice. So I started to explore that, and I'll tell you more about how I developed a business around teaching art in future episodes. But I think the one thing I've always done, which has probably led to me being a successful artist and building a successful business around it, is that I've always looked at the way you go about building a business of art differently than what perhaps most artists look at it. And typically most artists, if they've gone to fine art university, got a degree in fine art, and they've been brought up in the art world and mixed with galleries and other artists and so on, they tend to think about success in the art world completely differently to someone like me who's come in at a later age. I didn't start painting really seriously until I was in my early 40s. I haven't been painting that long by comparison with a lot of artists, but I've certainly surpassed the income level that most artists do. Now, there's different ways of measuring success. I understand that as an artist, but first and foremost, if you're an artist, the last thing you want to be doing is struggling to be able to buy art supplies, to be able to pay your rent or your mortgage, pay your bills, feed yourself, look after your family. Those are real world things you have to think about. So what a lot of artists end up doing is working a full-time job and trying to fit their art practice around their work. And, that's doable, but there is a better way. There is definitely a better way. So that just gives you a little bit of insight into me and what I'm up to. I've been full-time for the last 3 or 4 years. And as I said, I've built a fairly successful business. But really what I've done over the last 9 or 10 years is I built a foundation for success. And I've got a long-term view of what I'm doing, and I'd encourage you to do the same. So many people that I see think that they can just become an artist and get overnight success or get discovered, right? Get discovered. And, start selling their artwork easily, quickly. And that's just not the case. It takes time. There's a gestation period. So if you've been an artist for a while and you're struggling to sell work, maybe you sell a handful of paintings a year, and you're looking for the keys on how do you develop and grow, you just have to know it's going to take time. You have to put certain things in place and build assets around your artwork to enable you to create consistent and reliable income for the long term. Anyone can make a one-off sale of their art, right? It happens all the time. But consistent and reliable and repeatable and scalable income, that only comes when you've got certain foundations in place and you are in it for the long term. So you need to turn up to the studio. You need to be consistent. You need to produce quality work and improve that work all the time, right? If you're not doing that, then start there. You need a consistent, regular practice. You need to produce artwork, because if you don't produce some saleable product, right? And artists hate it when I call it product, but it's a product, right? If you don't produce saleable product, then you've got nothing to sell, and so no money flows back to you, okay? So one of the very first things I want to just really highlight for you, if you're an artist or if you're in any type of business, we have to bring value to the marketplace before money will flow back to us. And we have to do that in a significant volume, right? We have to continue to develop product and value and continue to put it into the marketplace, and just repeat that over and over until we get traction, until we get some momentum. And if you just turn up in the studio and keep turning out good quality work and make sure you promote it, put it in front of an audience of people who wants to buy artwork or has an interest in art, then you are going to start selling. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. But if you stop being consistent and regular, this is what I've found out because I have done that numerous times over the last decade. As soon as you stop being consistent and regular, that momentum stops. And without momentum, right, and attention in the marketplace, then you are going to get nowhere, right? So you need to be consistent and regular and reliable and keep improving and expanding and adding value into the marketplace. Right? Now, I'm getting off a little bit of a tangent. These are the type of concepts that I want to talk to you about in the Artist Soul podcast. And I hope that's something that's going to be of interest to you, as we progress forward. I'm also going to talk about learning to paint as well, because as artists, I think we should always be developing ourselves. We all reach our own sticking points and we all get stuck in a rut and we all have gaps in our knowledge and ability. So I want to talk about those ideas. We all have failure or fears of failure, and we have fear of success. I want to talk about that type of thing. And I want to talk about the mindset and planning for success as an artist. And so maybe you don't want to be a full-time income earning artist, but maybe you do want to reach the very heights of what your natural abilities will take you to. So learning to become a great artist. So we'll cover ideas and topics around that as well in the Artist Soul podcast. So I'm excited about bringing it to you. I hope you're going to love it and enjoy it as well. And I've got a lot to share. I've got a lot of opinions, right, about things, but they're opinions that are backed up by the fact that I've become a successful artist. Now, when I say successful, there's different ways of measuring it. I don't go out and win awards and, things like that. I very rarely exhibit my artwork in art shows. So, if awards are what's important to you and the recognition of a judge, then I'm probably not successful, right? But to me, it's always been about, I love art so much that I want to do it full time. But the only way I can do that is if I can pay my mortgage and put food on the table and look after my family, right? So that means I have to generate an income from it. And if I'm going to generate an income from it, there's no point generating an income you barely get by on, right? There's no point struggling. There is no merit in being a struggling, starving artist, I don't believe, right? Now, purists will tell you, especially those who are struggling, starving artists, that that's how you do your best work, but I don't believe that for a moment. I believe that if you have no stress in your life around money, then you free yourself up emotionally and spiritually to be able to really connect into that artistic soul that you have and be able to create your best work. So one of the biggest stresses for most artists is income, right? Not enough of it, not enough sales. And artists hate to admit this. They don't want to think that they're in the sales business. They don't want to think that they're in the art business at all. They don't want to talk about money and sales and things like that. But we're going to on this podcast. So this may not be for everyone, this podcast, but if it's for you, you'll know. We're about to enter 2020. It's time that artists started to open their minds and embrace sales and marketing, right? Embrace that and embrace the idea of earning an income from their art. I mean, why not? If you create great art, why don't you deserve to be rewarded for it, right? And all money is a value exchange. You put value into the marketplace, money will flow back to you, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all, at all. If you're a good artist or a great artist, you deserve to be rewarded for it, right? So I loved art so much that I wanted to do it full time, which meant I had to generate a reasonably good income from it. And I set about figuring out how to do that. And, I did figure it out, and I can share that with you. And that's what I want to do. So I'm excited about the Artist Soul podcast. I hope you are too. And I look forward to bringing you episode 2, where we'll start to get into the journey of becoming an artist and a full-time working artist. So look out for it. Thanks for joining me. My name's Rod Moore. I'll chat with you soon.